Hey everyone, today on the podcast I'm going to be talking about Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I'm then going to rank and rate the books, and then I'm going to reveal the next series I'm going to be doing on the podcast. So if that's something you're interested in, hang around and listen to a novel review. Hello and welcome to the Literature Podcast, a novel review. My name is Seamus, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature. And the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle. So let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hey everyone, welcome back. This is a novel review, a book podcast. My name is Seamus. If this is your first time joining me, then I would ask why. You should probably go back and watch Philosopher's Stone and then go through the series before you get to this episode. But of course, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you here. And if you are a returning customer, then thank you so much for joining us. Especially for this episode, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. It's been a great series to do. The Harry Potter series has been really nice to do them again. Not do them again, sort of read them again. And do the series, and I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone that's commented, liked, and subscribed. But especially the comments, I think they've been really interesting and really varied, and it's been wonderful to see people's opinions on different things and talk about them. For example, I did not like Order of the Phoenix, but a lot of people did, and it's like really interesting to see why people liked them and the fact that like some people liked them for the reasons that I didn't like them. So it's been an absolutely fun experience, and I think that's sort of the wonderful nature of this, because you know you get to disagree and disagree well, and I think that's really important. So thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that, and let's get on with the show. Okay, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I remember this book coming out, I think it was 2008. Cultural phenomenon, took the world by a storm. I've mentioned this before, I'm pretty sure I remember, and this could be wrong because I have been proven to be delusional when it comes to this, to remembering certain Harry Potter things, but I'm pretty sure there were like armored trucks carting around these books, and it was all very exciting, and I genuinely wonder if we'll ever have that again in our lifetime, because it was absolutely massive and fantastic for the literature scene. I've got a page of notes here. Normally I only put down like a couple of talking points and just have them in front of me to keep me on track. But it was a really interesting thing because I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed reading it. I smashed it, not too quickly. I think it's like 600 pages, so I think it took me a week. But the more I sort of sat down to write my notes, the more notes kept coming, and the more I actually not disliked the book, but started to find some issues with the book. And I mean, first I'll do an overview. We're back again with Harry. Every other book has been following sort of a sequential, a sequence of events basically. And this one's a little different because we're not returning to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. We are on the hunt for Horcruxes, and that's kind of the story, isn't it? Just hunting for the Horcruxes. There's a bit of drama. There's always drama when it comes to Harry. So, I mean, probably the worst overview I've ever done, but I'm sure many of us know the story, so I'll get on with it. I found when I started to write notes on this book, I started to become more and more unsatisfied with it. And I want to preface that by saying that I fully acknowledge that the unsatisfaction comes from the fact that this is the final book in the series, and endings are unsatisfying. They're always going to be unsatisfying because it's a little unsatisfying, isn't it? Like, what could it really be that we all just die in the end? Yes, like that's it. It's like that's such an unsatisfying ending. And it's, you know, this is, I think, a great example of it's more about the journey to get there, i.e. the first 6 books, than the ending itself. Because, I mean, you know, we all probably know that in the end, Harry's going to win and Voldemort's going to lose. And so it's a bit unsatisfying for that reason, but I think what I found most unsatisfying is that it's a really tough book to pull off. It's a really, really tough book to pull off. It was a really big ask. I mean, we had to find all these Horcruxes. We've spent 6 books growing and developing with these characters and falling in love with them. And it's going to be so tough to tie all those stories in a way that feels satisfying. Then, of course, find these Horcruxes, kill these Horcruxes, have the final showdown with Voldemort. And that's just such a big ask for one book. It's an incredibly dense book. And honestly, another thing that was really unsatisfying for me was we're just not at Hogwarts that much, because Hogwarts is a fantastic place. I was thinking about it, it's a really rich fantasy world, and it's perhaps, for me at least, feel free to let me know, it's one of the only fantasy worlds, and I haven't read that much fantasy. I know there's some really big fantasy buffs out there, so please let me know, but it's one of the fantasy worlds where I would really want to live. I mean, you think of Lord of the Rings, you'd want to live in the Shire, sure, but the rest of Middle-earth at that point in time is in decay and it's in decline, and everything's sort of a shadow of the greatness it once was. When you think about Game of Thrones, I mean, like, are you going to live in King's Landing and Flea Bottom? Hell no. So Harry Potter is this really interesting story in that it's one that you would actively want to live in. And for a lot of these books, Hogwarts is a pretty fine place to be unless you're Harry. I mean, the Philosopher's Stone, no one knows what's going on. Everyone's just having a good time at Hogwarts. It's just Harry running in the corridors trying to find the Philosopher's Stone. Chamber of Secrets is a bit different, of course. Prisoner of Azkaban, there's a bit of background fear with Sirius, but a lot of the kids would, not take notice in the same way that we don't take notice of a lot of things going on in the world. Goblet of Fire would be a sick story to live through because you just get to live through this huge tournament. As long as you're not taking part in it, you just get to have this year-long party with all these random people. Order of the Phoenix would, of course, suck a bit because Umbridge is a bitch. And then Half-Blood Prince was just chilling. So all in all, it's like a really nice series and a really nice world to live in. So yeah, I've kind of gone off on a really big tangent there. Let's get back to the Deathly Hallows. It opens much darker. Of course, we're reeling from the death of Dumbledore. This picks up pretty much where it left off from Half-Blood Prince. So we've got the death of Dumbledore right then and there. There's no Hogwarts. We're not returning to Hogwarts, which I think is a big factor because, yeah, as I just said on that huge tangent, Hogwarts is a huge amount of fun. There's no magical fun. And what I mean by that is not just going to Hogwarts is one thing, but the magical mundane that we get from going to Hogwarts has been really enjoyable. And I annoyed a few people when I said this because I said you could really, if you boil it down, you could start the series at Goblet of Fire. That's when Voldemort returns and that's when the story really starts to kick off. We, of course, don't want that. I'm just saying you could do it. And realistically, the story is about the Horcruxes. If you wanted to, you could probably break this down to 3 books, a trilogy. Hunting for Horcruxes and trying to beat this Dark Lord. You could probably do it. I mean, you definitely could do it. Who are we kidding? But we don't want to because we really enjoy the magical mundane going on. We really love the Quidditch matches on Saturdays and waking up and Ron starving and just gasping for food. We really love the divination classes, the potions classes. We love going to Hagrid's house for a cup of tea. So we've really come to love and enjoy these magically mundane moments of just seeing Harry sort of participate in life. But of course, we're not getting that in this book because he's not at Hogwarts this year. So I think that was a really big issue that detracted me from the story a bit. And of course, because we follow Harry, we just have a lot less characters going on. There's a lot less drama in sort of the teen angsty drama that we've come to enjoy. Luna's not there just saying outrageous things. Neville's not there being Neville. Ginny's not there sort of being sassy. We're not getting the sternness of Severus Snape. We're not getting the sass of Minerva McGonagall. We're just not getting these little moments where different characters interject the text and give us that freshness. We're just sort of stuck with Harry for a lot of this book, especially the first half of the book. And he is basically just wandering the moors like a 19th century ghost, which I think was a really interesting aspect of this story because I don't think we needed to do that for the first half of the book. The first half of the book, I mean, halfway through this book, you've still only found one Horcrux and we still don't know how to destroy it. And I was like, why couldn't we just have a couple chapters of this and then do a point of view from Neville and see what Hogwarts is like? Or Ginny, see what Hogwarts is like, or see what the Order's up to, or just follow Dumbledore. Dumbledore's dead. Follow Voldemort for a chapter. So I thought it was a really interesting way to structure the story. That being said, when I was reading those scenes, I didn't actually dislike it. It was only sort of looking back on it now that I was like, oh, that was a bit weird that we just follow Harry on these moors for half the book. And I don't know. I just found it interesting. I just realized I've gone such a roundabout way in discussing this book, and I missed a pretty important thing by saying this book opens much darker. The loss of Dumbledore hanging over us and then losing Moody pretty early on losing Hedwig as well, sort of just like a helpless death, really kind of sets the tone for this book as being much darker, and the characters are going to die, which I really, really enjoyed, because even though I don't like losing characters, of course I don't like death, it was good, and I think it really set the tone for what was going to be quite an adult book, and it just sets the tone of, yeah, characters are going to die, like this is a war, there are going to be casualties. And I think that really nicely set the tone for what was coming. And then, of course, halfway through, losing Dobby, I think, was probably the most emotional death, because Dobby's essentially innocent. I mean, he's been a slave pretty much all of his life, and then he's set free, and he sort of develops this, I only want to serve and help Harry Potter. And it's sort of in that service to Harry that he dies. And I thought that was really, really sad. It's kind of different from other characters. So yeah, it just sort of opened in this much darker stage. I did a lot of reading for this book when I finished it, sort of reading different comments, and I had no idea that so many people thought that some of these characters shouldn't have ended up with some other characters. So Ron and Hermione, I had no idea that there were such issues with Ron and Hermione getting together. I thought maybe it's just because I grew up with it and never sort of considered it and explored it, that so many people didn't like Ron and Hermione getting together. People thought Hermione should have ended up with Harry. Saw someone say Hermione should have ended up with, it was either Fred or George. Harry should have ended up with Ginny. Like, there was just so much of this like relationship drama that I had no idea what was going on. And so my initial note for these relationships was that Ron and Hermione actually should have hooked up a lot earlier. They should have kissed a lot earlier, because like I said, the first half of this book, they are just wandering aimlessly in the bush, and they're like, no, we're thinking about Horcruxes morning, noon and night. And it's like, no, you're really not thinking about Horcruxes every minute of the day. There is a bit of spare time. You're both pretty much, like, you're aware that you both like each other. There's kind of like that tension. You've got the threat of death. Just kiss each other. Just get it out of the way. Just do it, please. But they don't, and they don't do it till much later in the book. And I was just kind of like, why? Just like kiss now. Have a bit of fun. You could be dead tomorrow. There's kind of this looming threat of darkness over us. But I just had no idea that so many people really got involved in these relationships and really, really cared that Ron and Hermione got together. I always just thought it was obvious. Maybe I'm just a simpleton. But I thought it was, coming from a mile away. But yeah, what would I know? So touching briefly now upon the Horcruxes, like I said, sort of halfway through this book, we've still only found one Horcrux, which is the Horcrux we thought we'd found in Half-Blood Prince. And it was really interesting because what is different about this story is, or not what is different, I should say, but there's a new mystery that arises in this story, and that's the mystery of the Deathly Hallows, which I'm going to be honest, I really, really enjoyed. I thought it was really fresh. I thought it was really interesting. And, at the time, I'm just like, this is great. I love this story. And I then, reflecting back on it, was like, oh, I was probably just enjoying it because the Horcrux storyline just kind of stagnates for a lot of this book. Harry, for a lot of this book, doesn't know what to do. In fact, a lot of the characters don't know what to do. They don't know where to start. They feel pretty hopeless and helpless. And so it's natural, and I guess I associated with Harry in this, it's quite natural that then when something new and shiny comes along and maybe achievable, like the mystery of the Deathly Hallows, you just cling to it. And I clung to it, Harry clung to it, and I found it really enjoyable trying to figure out this mystery of the Deathly Hallows. Obviously, the Harry having the cloak is the first one that springs to mind immediately. And so I was like, oh, they're trying to figure out if it's real or not. And already we're like, oh, I think it's real because he's got the cloak. He's got the cloak that conceals him from death. And so I think I really liked that storyline, but in a way, reflecting now, it actually detracted me from a lot of the story because I think the Horcrux storyline was sort of teetering out in a way that was not boring, but they kind of just, because they were wandering these woods and moors and everything, there was sort of no development in terms of that storyline, and getting the Sword of Gryffindor is just like a chance happening thing that happens. It wasn't through their ingenuity or ideas. It just kind of happens to them. And because they're not doing anything in terms of trying to really think about Horcruxes in that way, they're just wandering these woodlands, it's really hard to progress the story, as we find for half this book. And I don't know how I would have done it differently. Like I said, I might have just cut the chapters down and focused on a few more other characters. I really did enjoy though how we got to learn about the other Horcruxes through occlumency, because I thought that was a really interesting way, because naturally Voldemort, once he thinks that Harry's hunting Horcruxes, he would naturally think of the other Horcruxes and wonder what they are. And that's sort of how Harry comes to learn about the other Horcruxes, what they are, how many there are, where they are, how he can then get to work on destroying them. And so this second half of the book really ramps up and really progresses quite quickly. It's incredibly dense. It's incredibly fast. I think the last sort of quarter of the book is pretty much all one night, which is incredible because it just feels like this vast, expansive, endless scene of chaos and just disaster, and the culmination of 7 and 6.5 books all coming together for this one final huge, gigantic scene. So I really, really enjoyed that. That now brings me to my favorite scene, because I had discussed this before and I thought it was in Half-Blood Prince. I'd kind of built it up for a while thinking it was in Half-Blood Prince. Then it wasn't in Half-Blood Prince, and I had an existential crisis thinking that maybe I just imagined the whole thing. I can confirm it is in this book. It's incredibly small, so I'm not completely delusional, but I have definitely built it up beyond what it actually was. It takes place in the chapter The Lost Diadem, and it is the scene where it's going to be so disappointing, I'm sorry, where Voldemort returns to the House of Gaunt to see if the ring is there. And I'll read the scene because it's literally like a couple of lines. So we're in Harry's head, then he sort of fades to black because he enters Voldemort's mind. The room of requirement vanished, and he was standing inside a ruined stone shack, and the rotting floorboards were ripped apart at his feet, and a disinterested golden box lay open and empty beside the hole, and Voldemort's scream of fury vibrated inside his head. And I have no idea why that scene was just so incredibly vivid to me, but I think there's so few scenes where you get to see Voldemort really furious and angry, and sort of the passion of anger really surging through his body. And I just imagine this scene of like Voldemort screaming at the top of his lungs and his house just kind of like exploding around him. And I always, that has just been my favorite scene. And it was kind of now shocking to reread it and find out that it's literally like 3 lines in this book. It's barely even a scene. It's a snapshot. It's a blink in the entirety of this book. So that's the scene. I'm so sorry if that's so disappointing for you guys. Because some of you were quite looking forward to finding out what the scene was, and it was like 2 lines. So incredibly sorry for that. I peg it down to my delusional 14-year-old self being exactly that, delusional. So something I've noticed throughout this series, and I spoke about it last episode, is sort of how J.K. Rowling has really developed these characters to be almost mirrors of each other. So Harry and Voldemort are kind of mirrors of each other in that they're both orphans that attend Hogwarts. They both find out they have magical properties quite late. Then they attend Hogwarts. And of course, Voldemort chooses a life of isolation and rejects love, whereas Harry embraces love. And it's kind of interesting to see how you can essentially start from the same place and go your own path. And I really enjoyed it because in this book, there's a lot of talk and chatter about Dumbledore, because naturally there's a few gossips now that Dumbledore's gone and no one's there to really defend his story as to who he was. A few people come out of the woodwork and start talking about Dumbledore and reveal that at a young age, sort of 17, he was at a time enticed by, I was about to say the dark side, sounds kind of Star Warsy, the dark side of the Force, the dark side of magic. And, he befriends Grindelwald, the previous Dark Lord that Dumbledore actually defeated. And in this friendship, he sort of flirts with these ideas that end up becoming quite dark. And of course, Grindelwald goes on to become a Dark Lord. And the reveal and revelation of that I thought was really interesting, because then Harry spends a lot of the book in kind of crisis, thinking that Dumbledore was this really benevolent, kind, wise character throughout his whole life. And to now learn that at an age that Harry is now at, he had these flirtations with darkness is really shocking to Harry, because Harry in that age cannot even conceive the idea of being enticed by such a thing. And I found that really interesting and a really interesting subplot to the story, because I think it really nicely evolves and develops, and it's something that, we're all young at one stage and we all have some pretty weird, wild, wacky, perhaps wonderful ideas that fade as you grow older and sort of learn to understand the world in a different way. And I thought it really, humanized Dumbledore as a character, But I think it really nicely, for me, came to a resolution in the epilogue of this book when we get to the chapter and Malfoy's there. And it's kind of like, because, to me, it felt like because Harry was able to come to grips with the fact that Dumbledore was once seduced by something, that didn't mean the rest of his life had to be exactly that. And I felt like that's sort of what Harry therefore mentally processed Malfoy's sort of life as, in, he was surrounded by this darkness and this evil in his parents, and he was seduced by it because it was just all around him. But, when push came to shove, he wasn't a terrible person at heart. And so he's able now to sort of break free from that and go and live and fulfill a life that, could perhaps be meaningful. Same as Snape as well, at one stage was enticed by these things and then grew up to develop and change his way of thinking and acting as well. So I really liked that little subplot. I know I've said I like the fact that there were quite a few deaths in this book, but I think now that I've said I found this book a bit unsatisfying because it's so hard to tie up so many loose threads. I mean, let's talk about Remus Lupin being killed off screen. That was just an absolute crime in my eyes, because Remus was this fantastic character. He is one of the Marauders. The Marauders are first really mentioned James Potter, Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew, and of course Remus Lupin. I mean, not Severus Snape. Sirius Black is mentioned in, I think, the first chapter of the book. James Potter's, of course, sort of always looming in the background of Harry's thoughts. And Remus Lupin enters the story in the third story when we learn about the Marauders, and he's this really nice sort of father figure, and he's a really great teacher. He's got a really nice temperament for teaching that I think is really beneficial to teaching kids. And he's an incredibly nice character. And then to just have him killed off screen was just, I think, criminal. I mean, he was the last of the Marauders alive, and there was, I don't know, it really kind of pissed me off, actually, that he didn't get at least an on-screen death, which wouldn't have been that hard to write. And it was kind of, I think, for me in my mind, I didn't clock it at the time, but as I started to think back, I was like, we can get 200 pages of Harry walking the woods thinking about Horcruxes, but we can't spare a few lines to give Remus Lupin the dignity of dying on screen. I don't know. One of those choices that I will never understand, and I don't have to because I'm not the writer. It's not my story, it's someone else's story, but still, I would have liked to see him die on screen. I wouldn't have liked to see him die at all, of course, but, if he's going to die, let him die on screen. Here's another thing I really didn't like at the time, and I'm sorry that this has turned into a bit of a dissing session. It's really not, because I really did enjoy the book. But we're in the Room of Requirement, and Malfoy's arrived with Crabbe and Goyle, and I can't remember exactly which character. I think it was Crabbe, but Crabbe summons this fire, or one of them summons this fire. And after Hermione's like, that was like a really dangerous fire. That kind of fire can kill a Horcrux, and I knew about this, and I would never attempt it because it's dangerous. And I was just kind of like, what? So you did know how to destroy a Horcrux, but you didn't want to do it because you thought it was too dangerous. That is something I think you should have brought up so that you could at least have a discussion about it. But also, Crabbe and Goyle were presented throughout the series as just being these big, fat, dumb oafs. And suddenly, one of them has got the capabilities and power and magical skill to destroy a Horcrux just like that. And I was like, what the hell? Why are you making Hermione out like this fool all of a sudden, and Crabbe or Goyle, whichever one it was, is this kind of like genius? It really kind of annoyed me in the moment, because I was like, Hermione's like a really powerful wizard, and the fact that she didn't even have, because throughout this series she's an incredibly rational character, the fact that she didn't have the rationale to bring it up and talk about it with Ron and Harry, I thought was a really poor move. And yeah, just the fact that she knew how to destroy a Horcrux but never once mentioned it, it just seemed absolutely wild. But then him having the skill to summon this fire to kill a Horcrux just seemed just as wild. One more thing I'll touch upon, a couple more things I'll touch upon. What am I saying? The fact, I found it interesting. Throughout the series, Hermione cries a lot. And this was something I enjoyed. And this is something I really enjoy about literature and sort of having these discussions. Hermione cries a lot, and the boys never cry. And I always found that quite interesting and a bit annoying as well, because it's always like, oh, the girl character's crying. She doesn't seem to be able to manage her. It just seemed very stereotypical of a woman crying. And I always kind of disliked that, and I touched upon that in, I think it was the Goblet of Fire episode, because I was like, Harry never seems to have any emotional outbursts to this immense amount of pressure, whereas Hermione just seems to always be crying. And I always disliked that. And then I saw a comment, this girl saying, I really enjoy the fact that Hermione cries a lot because it shows you can be revered as this incredible witch, and you can be revered as this incredible witch, this incredibly powerful, capable witch, and still cry and not have to become this cold-hearted, emotionless character that sort of seems to be the trope of so many different series, where you just have to like reject all emotion to get to the top. And Hermione doesn't do that because she's still incredible and she still cries a lot. And I really like that because I was like, oh yeah, that's true. She does cry a lot and she is still respected as being incredibly capable, the most capable out of especially the three of them, but perhaps all of Hogwarts bar Dumbledore, but maybe she'll get there one day. I don't know. But I really enjoyed the sort of the duality of thinking there. My thoughts of, I found it a bit too stereotypical, but someone else being like, no, I really enjoyed that because it humanizes them as characters more. And I really enjoyed that. So that's something I really found positive. I opened with The Close. Is a brilliant sort of, J.K. Rowling has had this wonderful skill of just peppering through the series so many foreshadowing moments. And I opened with The Close as one of them. It's probably my favorite. It's the fact that the first book, Philosopher's Stone, was released in 1997, I believe it was. And the final book in the canon of the story takes place in 1997. So I open with The Close. I mean, yeah, just a brilliant little moment. Really, really simple, but really, really rich. And it's the kind of series that really rewards rereads. The last thing I'll say is, of course, the defeat of Voldemort is, I think, really apt. And the fact that we've spent the whole book concerned with Dumbledore's humanity, I think the fact that then Voldemort dies as exactly that, a human being, a man, even though he sort of stripped himself of all kind of dignity and respect and humanity. I think the fact that he dies as essentially a human being, a mortal being, is a really great ending to the book. So yeah, it was a fun story. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, what a series. I'm going to rate this one a 4.1 out of 5. Okay, we're not done yet. I promised you I would now rate and reveal the books in the order that I think. I put them in order here so you can see. I'll briefly run through it and then I'll tell you why. Order of the Phoenix at the bottom, Philosopher's Stone, Deathly Hallows, Chamber of Secrets, Prisoner of Azkaban, Goblet of Fire, Half-Blood Prince. That's the order of least favorite at the bottom to most favorite at the top. I'm sorry, I know I'm upsetting a lot of people by saying that. But I just didn't like the Order of the Phoenix that much. And I find it really interesting that the two books I like the most, Goblet of Fire and Half-Blood Prince, bookend the Order of the Phoenix. So I think there's something in that. I think I also have to concede that I had to read Prisoner of Azkaban, Goblet of Fire, and Order of the Phoenix back to back to back. And I think just getting to Order of the Phoenix and having Harry in that angsty teen mood and sort of whinging a lot really was not what I needed at that point. So that could be a reason. Philosopher's Stone, second last. Tough one, because I normally love an opening book, but this one was just a bit too overviewy, a bit too scene setting, but still a solid read. I mean, it's I'm saying the worst of a great bunch, so it's definitely not a bad book. Deathly Hallows, just because it's the least Harry Potter book in terms of we're not at Hogwarts. And then, of course, Chamber of Secrets. I really enjoyed this one. It was really fun. I think it's, you get deeper into the story, you sort of get going a bit more, you're sort of finding your baby steps in Philosopher's Stone, and then you get going with Chamber of Secrets. Before reading this, I would have said Prisoner of Azkaban would have been my least favorite book, and I was absolutely pleasantly surprised that it was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, that's got to be third, because that was absolutely fantastic. The last sort of 50 pages of that were just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I loved it. Goblet of Fire, number 2. I think it's just a great fantasy story, isn't it? Like a Triwizard tournament going on. It's the widening of the wizarding world, the inclusion of a few different countries. I think it's Bulgaria and France. There's dragons, there's a tournament, Voldemort returns, so absolutely brilliant. And then, of course, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, because it is just cozy, it is comforting, it's magically mundane, and I found it absolutely wonderful. You get the backstory of Voldemort and the death of Dumbledore. Brilliant. Okay, as promised, I'm going to be doing another series now. I had so much fun doing this series. I'm going to keep doing series, one book a month, and this one was recommended to me by a listener. This will be coming out October, November, and December. I've then already got the next 2 series booked for January, February, March, April, May, and June. I've had way too much fun with it. I am going to be reading His Dark Materials. The first one is Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. I've already bought the other 2 as well. I've got the complete set, the first 3 books, and I am 173 pages in and absolutely loving it. I can't wait to sort of properly sink my teeth into another fantasy series. It's absolutely fantastic so far. It's really, really different. Really not what I was expecting at all. I have no idea where it's going. I have absolutely no idea. I'd never heard of these books. No idea where it's going. No idea what's going to happen. It was absolutely confusing and baffling at the start, but I am having a lot of fun so far. Really happy to just be swept along in another fantasy series. So yeah, if that's something you're interested in, I'm going to be doing that October, November, and December. Feel free to read along if you want. Otherwise, just check out the episodes when they come out. So thank you so much for listening. If you have listened this far, it's been an absolute pleasure to read these books and bring you episodes every month for the last 7 months. That has gone by really quick. If you would like to like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. But as always, just thank you for your attention. So I think it's time to take us away, and I'm going to read the first paragraph because it's from Aeschylus, the Libation Bearers. These are episodes I did as well, and any opportunity to read a bit of it again. So here is one section of it. Oh, the torment bred in the race, the grinding scream of death, and the stroke that hits the vein. The hemorrhage none can staunch, the grief, the curse no men can bear. But there is a curse in the house, and not outside it. No, not from others, but from them, their body strife. We sing to you, dark gods beneath the earth. Now hear, you blissful powers underground. Answer the call and send help. Bless the children, give them triumph now.